There comes a moment in every life when the mind grows weary of struggle, when no affirmation, no plan, no outer help seems to work. We reach that silent cry within, "What must I do?" And it is in that moment, when all human effort has failed, that something sacred begins to stir. A presence, quiet and visible, but unmistakably real, begins to whisper from within. It says, "Be still and know." You see, every problem that confronts us is not a punishment, not a test, not even an obstacle. It is simply a veil covering the truth that has always been present. The truth that within you right now exists a power untouched by circumstance, untouched by fear, untouched by time itself. The world has taught us to pray for things, for healing, for money, for peace, for solutions. But true prayer, the kind that dissolves every problem instantly, is not a reaching out. It's a turning in. It's not asking for something to appear. It's awakening to what's already here. In this talk, we're not going to pray as beggars. We're going to pray as awareness. We will discover that the moment we recognize the infinite presence, not as a distant God, but as the very life within, that recognition itself becomes the miracle. So if there's a burden you're carrying, a fear you can't shake, or a problem that's lingered too long, don't look for a solution. Look instead for that quiet awareness that says, "I am here. I have never left you." So let's begin where most of humanity misunderstands the entire subject, with what we call prayer. From childhood, we're taught that prayer is something we do to God. We ask for help, we plead for healing, we beg for supply, we bargain for peace. We direct our words upward, as though the infinite were somewhere above the clouds, keeping account of what we deserve or deny. But that form of prayer, the prayer of petition, belongs to a consciousness that still believes in separation. It begins with the assumption that God is somewhere else, and that we must somehow attract divine attention to fix our human situation. The tragedy of this belief is not that it is wrong, but that it keeps us bound to the very problem we wish to escape, because the moment you ask, you affirm lack. You confirm to your own mind that something is missing. You say, "I do not have," and the universe responds exactly in kind. It mirrors that belief of absence. You are praying from the level of the problem, not from the awareness of wholeness. True prayer is not an act of asking. It is an act of recognition. It is the quiet acknowledgement that the presence you seek is already here. It is the realization that nothing needs to be added, removed, or changed for you to experience harmony, only recognized. You see, there are not two powers in this universe. There is not good and evil, spirit and matter, heaven and earth as opposing forces. There is only one presence, expressing itself as infinite form and intelligence. Every problem arises the moment we believe there are two, God and man, spirit and world, love and fear. The moment that duality enters consciousness, harmony is obscured, and prayer becomes an attempt to bridge the gap that never truly existed. Real prayer bridges nothing. It simply dissolves the illusion that there was ever a distance to cross. Think of it this way. If you stand before a mirror, your reflection moves as you move. It does not think, struggle, or delay. It responds instantly. The reflection is not separate from you. It is you expressed in form. In the same way, the outer conditions of your life are but the reflection of your inner awareness. The moment awareness shifts, the image follows. And that shift is what prayer truly is. When Joel Goldsmith said, "The prayer of realization is the only prayer," he meant that the purpose of prayer is not to change God's mind, but to awaken ours. The entire process of prayer is a movement from human thinking to divine knowing. It is the stillness that allows us to perceive what already is. Let me say something that may sound radical at first. God does not hear your words. God is not a being listening to millions of voices. God is consciousness itself, the very awareness by which you think, breathe, and perceive. So when you speak to God, you are speaking within the infinite field of your own divine being. Prayer becomes communion, not communication. It becomes union, not request. When the mind settles into that awareness, something astonishing happens. The restless thoughts begin to dissolve. The desire for outcomes softens. The body relaxes and the breath deepens. You're no longer thinking about what you want to happen. You're feeling what already is. That feeling, that awareness of presence, is the prayer. It is not spoken, it is known. It carries its own authority, its own peace, its own completion. And it works instantly, not because it changes outer things, but because it changes the level from which you are living. At the higher level of awareness, problems cannot exist, not because you fought them off, but because you stepped into the light where their shadows cannot reach. Now, this is not about passivity or denial. It's not about pretending there is no pain, no loss, no fear. It's about understanding the nature of appearance, realizing that what we call a problem is only a picture projected by a state of thought. When the thought changes, the picture dissolves. You don't fix a movie by arguing with the screen. You change the film running through the projector. Prayer is that change of film, a shift from the belief in separation to the recognition of oneness. So when you sit in stillness, when you turn within, don't ask for something. Don't beg for answers. Simply listen. You may say quietly within yourself, "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth," and then let the mind fall silent. In that silence, an awareness arises, gentle but powerful, that you are not a body pleading to a distant God. You are the very expression of divine life itself. That is the sacred moment. That is the real prayer. Once that realization dawns, you begin to see how effortlessly harmony reveals itself. The so-called problem, whether it was financial, physical, or emotional, begins to loosen its grip, not because a miracle descended from above, but because the false belief that sustained it has vanished. This is the mystery behind the phrase, the prayer that instantly dissolves any problem. It is not instant because it manipulates conditions. It is instant because it awakens truth. In the presence of truth, falsity has no continuity. Light doesn't fight darkness. It simply shines and darkness is gone. And so prayer is the shining of awareness. It is not a doing but a being. Not an effort but a recognition. The only preparation required is the willingness to be still, to lay aside your opinions, fears, and desires long enough to feel the pulse of divine life that never stopped beating within you. The irony is that when you stop asking, you receive more. When you stop seeking, you find. When you stop resisting, the flow of grace begins to move unobstructed through every corner of your existence. It is then that the words of the Master become alive. Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of, before ye ask him. Before you form the thought, before you utter the word, the infinite has already fulfilled itself through you. All that's left is awareness, the prayer of realization. So let us no longer pray as seekers but as knowers. Let us not pray for things, but in the quiet assurance of divine completeness. For the truth is eternal, and simple prayer is not asking for something to happen. It is awakening to the fact that nothing is missing. That is the beginning of all healing, the foundation of all peace, and the one prayer that dissolves every problem. Now that we've seen the real nature of prayer, let's take the next step, the step that most of us resist the longest, understanding the illusion of the problem. Every day, people say to me, "Joel, if God is all, if divine presence fills all space, then why do I still have pain? Why is there lack? Why do I suffer?" And the answer, though it may sound simple, strikes at the very foundation of human belief, because we are giving reality to what is only appearance. Every problem exists only as an appearance in human consciousness. That doesn't mean it doesn't feel real. It feels very real. The pain, the anxiety, the fear, the sense of loss, they feel absolute. But the spiritual life begins when we recognize that feeling is not fact. Appearances are not truth. The moment you name something a problem, you have unconsciously declared it to have substance, presence, and power. You have given it existence apart from the infinite, and that single act of mental recognition, that instant of believing something stands outside of divine order, is what creates the experience of struggle. We have been hypnotized by appearances. Humanity is under a kind of collective mesmerism, a spell that says, there are powers other than God. There is evil as well as good. There is sickness as well as health. There is failure as well as success. And once we accept those opposites, we are caught in a constant battle to replace one with the other. But in that battle, the illusion strengthens. Because to fight a shadow, you must first believe it is real. Goldsmith often said, "Evil has no power except the power we give it by believing in it." Think about that for a moment. The problem doesn't dissolve because you've prayed hard enough. It dissolves because you've stopped believing in its independent existence. You've withdrawn the energy that sustains it. It's like a dream. When you're in the middle of a nightmare, it seems utterly real. The danger, the fear, the running. But the moment you awaken, you realize there was never anything to escape from. The scene was an illusion within consciousness. You never left your bed. The problem existed only within the dream state. In the same way, most of what we call problems are dreams of separation, dreams projected by a mind that has forgotten its source. They persist only as long as we stay asleep in that dream. Awakening is not fighting the dream, it is recognizing that you were never in it. Now, I'm not telling you to deny what you see. I'm saying see it, but know what you're seeing, and know that every outer appearance is a shadow cast by an inner belief. Know that what stands before you as conflict or limitation is not a power, it is a picture. And like all pictures, it has no life of its own. When you begin to view life this way, something subtle shifts. The tension begins to ease. You stop running after results and start observing quietly. You realize that you're not here to fix the picture. You're here to wake up from the picture. The illusion always begins with one thought: I am separate from God. The moment that thought enters, fear is born. Because if I am separate, then I must protect myself, defend myself, provide for myself, heal myself. And from that moment forward, the entire human drama unfolds, filled with anxiety, competition, and suffering. But in truth, we were never separate. The leaf does not exist apart from the tree, nor the wave apart from the ocean. The sense of separateness is the only problem, and it's not even real. Once this is understood, prayer changes its purpose. You're no longer praying to fix appearances, you're praying to dissolve false belief. You're praying not for conditions to improve, but for your vision to clear. You begin to see the unreality of lack, sickness, fear, and conflict, not by positive thinking, but by divine knowing. When the illusion is seen for what it is, it naturally fades. Not through effort, but through understanding. You don't fight the darkness, you turn on the light. That light is awareness. Awareness that God alone is power, presence, and reality. When you live in that awareness, appearances lose their hypnotic pull. The pain may knock on your door, but it can no longer enter. The fear may whisper, but it finds no listener. Let's bring this into the simplest terms. Imagine you're watching a movie. On the screen, a character is in great danger, running from a fire or trapped in a storm. Your heart races, your body tenses. For a moment, you feel their fear. But then you remember it's only a film. The actor is safe, the fire is an illusion of light, the storm is sound and image. Your body relaxes. You still see the same picture, but your understanding dissolves the fear. That is precisely how the mystic meets life's appearances. He sees them, he doesn't deny them, but he knows what he's seeing. He knows that behind every form is the invisible presence, unchanging, undisturbed, whole. The world may call it a miracle when a problem vanishes, but in truth, it is not the problem that disappeared. It is the belief in its reality that was transcended. What we call healing is simply the correction of perception, the restoration of true sight. And so, when we say the Om prayer that dissolves any problem, we're not speaking of a formula or incantation. We're speaking of a shift in consciousness, from belief in the appearance to recognition of reality, the power that heals, the intelligence that guides, the supply that sustains. These have never been missing. What was missing was our awareness of them. Once awareness returns, harmony reappears in form, just as sunlight returns when the clouds of belief are lifted. You and I are not here to manipulate shadows. We are here to behold truth, to stand still in the face of appearances and say within ourselves, "Thou art the only presence, the only power, the only life." And as we do, the illusion weakens, the storm subsides, and the still small voice within begins to speak again. Not in thunder, but in quiet assurance. Be not afraid, it is I. So the next time a problem arises, before you rush to fix it, pause. Look at it, and silently remind yourself this is not what it appears to be. Let that awareness settle deep into your being. Let the illusion lose its power through your understanding. Because the truth is simple, timeless, and liberating, there is a quiet instant, subtle, fleeting, and yet more powerful than any thunder, when the mind stops reaching, and awareness suddenly turns inward. You cannot force it, you cannot schedule it, you can only be still enough to let it happen. This is the moment of recognition, when the veil of illusion thins and the presence that has always been here makes itself known. You may be walking down a street, washing dishes, sitting in meditation, or simply watching the light move across the room. And suddenly something within you shifts. The noise of thought fades, the tension in the body eases, and in that spacious stillness, not intellectually, not through belief, but through direct perception, that life, this very life, is divine, that you are not apart from it, but the expression of it. That instant is not emotional excitement or mystical drama, it is awareness returning to itself. You recognize that everything you sought through prayer, peace, safety, fulfillment, has been here all along, quietly present beneath the chatter of the mind. This realization is the true prayer because it is contact with reality. It is the moment the dreamer awakens. For years we try to reach God through words, rituals, affirmations, or philosophies. Yet all those efforts are still movements of the human mind. They are attempts by the finite to grasp the infinite. And the infinite cannot be grasped. It must be revealed. The moment of recognition happens when the mind grows silent enough that revelation becomes possible. Goldsmith called this the grace of awareness. It is not achieved through struggle, but through surrender. When you have exhausted the effort to fix, control, and understand, you fall into silence, and in that surrender, awareness reveals itself as presence. The problem that seemed so real a moment ago dissolves, not because it was solved, but because you stepped out of the level where the problem existed. It's as if you were listening to static on a radio. You twist the dial in frustration, trying to get a clear signal. Then suddenly, you find the exact frequency, and music fills the room. The music was always there. The airwaves were vibrating with it all along, but until you tuned correctly, you couldn't hear it. Recognition is that tuning. When consciousness aligns with reality, harmony reveals itself effortlessly. At that moment, prayer changes its meaning. It's no longer something you do. It becomes something that happens through you. Words fall away, replaced by a profound silence that communicates more than language ever could. You find yourself resting in awareness, knowing without thinking that I and the Father are one. And many people imagine that such experiences are rare, reserved for saints, mystics, or spiritual geniuses. But that's another illusion. Recognition is not a mystical event that descends from the heavens. It's the natural state of every awakened consciousness. It is as close to you as your own breath, as immediate as your next heartbeat. What makes it seem rare is that the human mind is noisy, and recognition speaks only in silence. Think of a pool of water disturbed by wind. The surface ripples and distorts every reflection. Only when the wind ceases does the surface become clear enough to mirror the sky perfectly. So it is with us. The wind of thought, fear, judgment, desire, analysis keeps the mind agitated. But when that movement stops, even for a second, consciousness becomes transparent. And through that stillness, the infinite shines. This is why the mystic's work is never to get God's attention, but to become inwardly quiet enough to see what is already true. And when that seeing occurs, something extraordinary follows: gratitude. Not gratitude for something gained, but gratitude simply for being, for the wonder of existence itself. You realize that life is not happening to you, it is happening as you. You are not a person receiving God's gifts. You are the awareness through which those gifts appear. From this state, even the smallest moment, a breath, a bird's song, a ray of sunlight, becomes sacred. You no longer separate the spiritual from the ordinary because you see that the presence fills all things. Every face, every circumstance is a doorway into the same infinite reality. Recognition lifts you out of the horizontal dimension of seeking and plants you firmly in the vertical dimension of being. And yet, this recognition doesn't make you detached from life. It makes you more tender, more compassionate, more alive. Because when you see that the same life animates everyone, the walls of judgment begin to fall. You can no longer condemn, compete, or fear, because you recognize yourself in all that you behold. This awareness also has a practical effect. Situations that once felt impossible begin to unfold with grace. Relationships heal, supply appears, guidance comes. Not because you forced anything, but because your consciousness stopped resisting the flow of harmony. What you call answer to prayer is really the outer form catching up with the inner realization. In that state, you no longer measure life by what happens, but by what you perceive. You stop reacting and begin responding from stillness. You discover that peace is not the absence of storms, it is the presence that remains unmoved through them. Once you have tasted even a moment of that recognition, nothing else satisfies. You may drift away from it at times, but you can never again believe completely in the world of appearances. Some part of you always knows there is a deeper reality pulsing beneath everything. And that knowing draws you back again and again into silence, until eventually that silence becomes your dwelling place. You see, recognition is not the end of prayer. It is the beginning of conscious living. It's the shift from searching for God to seeing as God sees. From that vision, life becomes simple. The need to control fades. The desire to argue, justify, or prove disappears. You begin to trust the invisible order that sustains all things. And when fear arises, and it will, you meet it not with resistance, but with remembrance. You remember that moment when the presence revealed itself, and you realize that nothing has changed. The same reality is here now, untouched by circumstance. That remembrance itself becomes the continuing prayer. So the next time you find yourself in confusion, don't try to think your way out. Don't analyze or argue with appearances. Just pause, even for a breath, and let the mind grow still. Somewhere in that stillness, the music is already playing, the peace is already flowing, and the answer is already known. Because the truth is this: the presence you seek has never left. It is waiting only for your recognition. And when that moment comes, when you feel that quiet knowing that all is well, hold it gently. Let it fill you. Let it guide you. And then remember, when that moment of recognition dawns, that quiet realization of presence, something profound begins to unfold. You start to see that the root of every problem, every fear, every sorrow, lies in one false belief, the belief that you are separate from God. All human struggle begins the moment consciousness accepts the idea of separation. It is subtle but universal. We say, I need more strength. I need more peace. I need more love. Without realizing that the very statement assumes we are apart from the source of all those things. We are like waves longing for the ocean, unaware that we are the ocean, rising and falling in infinite rhythm. The mind, conditioned by centuries of material thinking, insists that life is external, that God is somewhere above, that good must be attained, that peace must be earned. And as long as we live in that belief, our lives become a search for wholeness in fragments. We run from one form to another, from relationships to achievements to prayers, seeking the completeness that only union can bring. But here is the great truth: there is no union to achieve, because there was never a separation to begin with. What we call spiritual progress is not a journey toward God. It is an awakening to the fact that we have never been apart. The leaf may imagine itself isolated when it looks away from the tree, but in truth its life is the life of the tree. Its nourishment, its color, its very being flow from the invisible sap that connects it to the whole. So it is with us. The moment we turn our attention inward and recognize the life that animates us, the sense of isolation dissolves, and with it the entire network of fear and desire. You see, fear is the child of separation. The instant we believe we are apart from the source, we begin to feel vulnerable. We look to the outer world for protection, security, validation. We depend on people, circumstances, and possessions to reassure us that we're safe. But safety cannot be found in the transient. It can only be found in what is eternal, and that is the presence within. To dissolve the sense of separation, we must shift from believing in God to being still enough to feel God. Belief keeps God conceptual, a mental object to be admired, worshipped, or feared. But feeling, direct awareness, is living contact. It is the moment when the line between the seeker and the sought disappears. You are no longer trying to reach God, you are resting in the fact that God is expressing as you. This is why Goldsmith said, "You are not living your life. Life is living itself as you." To the human mind, that sounds abstract, but in practice, it's deeply liberating. When you truly sense that the infinite presence is living as you, the burden of control falls away. You stop striving, you stop defending, you stop forcing outcomes, and everything begins to move with a natural rhythm that feels guided, effortless, right? At first the mind resists this. It says, "But if I don't control things, won't everything fall apart?" And yet, that's the illusion speaking. Look around. The planets keep to their orbits, the tides rise and fall, the heart beats, the seasons turn, all without your permission. The same intelligence that governs the galaxies governs your next breath. Separation makes you forget that harmony is already built into the fabric of existence. When this realization deepens, even pain takes on a new meaning. You begin to see suffering not as punishment or failure, but as the tension created by believing in separation. The pain is the friction of resistance, consciousness pressing against its own truth. Once you surrender the belief that you are alone, the resistance softens and healing begins to flow. This is what the mystic means when he says, "The presence goes before me to make the crooked places straight." It doesn't mean a distant power is fixing your path. It means that when you live in awareness of oneness, harmony naturally expresses through you. There is nothing to fix because nothing is broken in reality. And this understanding transforms how we see others. When you no longer live from the illusion of separation, you stop perceiving them. You see only one life, infinite in form but singular in essence. Compassion ceases to be an effort, it becomes instinct. Forgiveness is no longer a moral act, it's the natural consequence of seeing rightly. How could you hold resentment toward another when you realize the same presence lives in them as in you? Even prayer becomes simpler. It is no longer, "God, help me," but "Father, I rest in Thee." It is not a reaching upward, but a sinking inward. It is the stillness that allows you to feel the flow of unity, the undivided wholeness that was never absent. In that stillness, something sacred happens. You begin to sense that everything, every sound, every breath, every moment, is filled with presence. The world doesn't change, but your perception of it does. The same ordinary moments begin to shimmer with quiet divinity. The boundary between spiritual and material dissolves because you realize they were never two to begin with. And as this awareness stabilizes, your life reflects it. Relationships soften, conflicts dissolve, abundance appears, not as something gained, but as something revealed. For the presence that lives as you now expresses through you without obstruction. You have become transparent to the infinite. It's important to understand that this isn't a mystical escape from the world. It is the redemption of perception within the world. You still live, work, love, and engage, but you do so from awareness, not from fear. You live from fullness, not from lack. You are no longer trying to hold life together. You are letting life live itself in perfect rhythm. And this, my friends, is the true healing. Every healing is the dissolution of separation. Every answered prayer is the rediscovery of unity. When you see that, you stop chasing miracles because you realize the miracle is awareness itself. So tonight, if there's any part of you that feels alone, uncertain, or disconnected, pause for a moment. Close your eyes. Let the thoughts settle. And in the stillness, feel the quiet pulse of life within you. That gentle rhythm that has never stopped. That is not your heartbeat, that is the universe breathing through you. And in that realization, the walls fall away. You are home. For the truth is eternal, there was never separation, only the forgetting of oneness. Remember that and the world changes, because your sight has been made whole. Once the sense of separation dissolves, prayer itself takes on a new meaning. It's no longer something you do. It becomes something you are. Prayer ceases to be a petition and becomes a state of consciousness, a living awareness of the presence that walks with you, breathes through you, and acts as you. We often think of prayer as an event, a moment in time set apart from daily life. We kneel, we speak words, we close our eyes, and then we rise again, returning to normal. But that kind of prayer, while sincere, still carries the idea of distance. It assumes there's a you who must reach out to a God who may or may not respond. And as long as we hold to that duality, prayer remains a transaction rather than a revelation. True prayer is not a moment apart from life. It is the quality of awareness with which we live life itself. When you understand this, you begin to realize that every moment can be prayer. You're walking, you're breathing, you're listening, you're silence. You can live in such awareness that you don't need to speak a single sacred word, and yet your entire being radiates communion. To live prayer means to abide in that inner stillness where you know, not intellectually, but experientially, that the presence is here. It is an inner posture of receptivity. It's not about getting answers, but about being the space where answers unfold naturally. You see, words are symbols, and symbols belong to the realm of mind, but the presence we seek to commune with lies beyond mind, in the realm of awareness itself. The moment you quiet the mind and dwell in that awareness, prayer becomes living experience rather than mental exercise. And in that experience, there is no me asking and no God answering. There is only life recognizing itself. Now, when you begin to live this way, something remarkable happens. The outer life starts to harmonize, not because you are controlling it, but because the inner vibration of harmony is now radiating through you. You've become attuned to the source, and that attunement expresses itself in every area of living, in relationships, health, work, and peace. Joel.Goldsmith often said, "We do not pray to change God's mind, we pray to change our awareness of God." That is the heart of living prayer. It's not about convincing the infinite to intervene. It's about awakening to the fact that the infinite is already acting through you. The shift is subtle, but it changes everything. You move from effort to surrender, from will to trust, from seeking to resting. When prayer becomes living awareness, you stop measuring outcomes. You no longer pray for specific things, for money, for healing, for opportunities, because you realize those things are only the shadows of an inner state. Instead, you abide in presence, and the outer world naturally rearranges itself to reflect that inner completeness. This is why the mystic never asks for anything. He abides as everything. It takes courage to live this way. The mind resists surrender. It wants to pray for results, to see proof, to calculate whether God has answered. But the prayer that dissolves problems isn't a formula. It's an atmosphere. When your consciousness becomes so saturated with the awareness of presence that even your thoughts are silent, that atmosphere itself heals, restores, and harmonizes all that concerns you. To live prayer means to carry this awareness into the simplest acts of your day. When you walk into a room, pause for a moment before you speak. Feel the stillness within. Let your awareness expand before the words form. You'll find that your speech carries peace instead of reaction. When you face a difficulty, don't rush to fix it. Step back inwardly and let the presence reveal the harmony that already exists beneath appearances. When you meet another person, look beyond their personality and quietly acknowledge the same life living as them. In time, you'll realize that your very presence becomes a form of prayer. You become a conduit through which others feel peace without knowing why. Your calm becomes contagious, your silence becomes eloquent, and your life itself becomes testimony to the invisible grace that sustains all things. This is not passivity. It is the most dynamic way of living possible. When you live in awareness of the infinite, you act with clarity, you speak with wisdom, and you move with purpose. Yet there is no strain, because the action does not arise from the human mind. It arises from the infinite expressing through you. Living prayer transforms ordinary existence into sacred expression. Washing dishes, tending to work, caring for another, driving home. Every act becomes a form of communion. You are no longer doing things for God or to find peace. You are doing them as an expression of the peace you already are. And this living awareness has a remarkable effect on the human condition. Problems dissolve, not because they are fixed externally, but because the consciousness that perceived them has changed. Fear can't survive in the light of awareness. Lack can't persist in the presence of realization. Discord can't stand before the quiet recognition that all life is one. So the practice becomes simple wherever you are. Pause inwardly. Rest for a moment in that invisible stillness. Feel the quiet pulse of being that underlies every thought, every sound, every breath. That awareness is prayer, not as an act, but as a state of consciousness. It's not about finding time to pray. It's about living in a way where time itself becomes prayerful. And in that living prayer, every step you take, every encounter you have, Every breath you draw becomes sacred. Now, when you understand this, the idea of praying for something loses meaning. Because how can the infinite ask for what it already is? The ocean doesn't need to pray for water. The sun doesn't need to pray for light. And you, as the living expression of divine consciousness, don't need to pray for supply, peace, or love. You are the conduit through which these qualities flow. So, the next time you feel tempted to reach outward, to ask, to beg, remember your only real work is to become still, to remember the truth, to live the prayer. And when you live the prayer, something wondrous happens. Problems dissolve, not by force, but by recognition. You see through illusion, and what remains is harmony itself. Because the greatest prayer ever uttered is not spoken in words, it is lived in awareness. There comes a point in every true spiritual journey when even prayer becomes silent. Not because we've lost faith, but because we've gone beyond the need for words. The mind has said all it can say, and what remains is something deeper, a presence that can only be felt. That is the sacred silence where healing begins, where truth reveals itself, where all seeking ends. For most of our lives, we've been taught to fill the silence, to explain, to justify, to ask, to repeat words until we feel heard. But the infinite does not respond to words, it responds to awareness. When we quiet the surface noise of thought, we begin to sense the still movement of spirit underneath. It's not dramatic, not emotional, it's still clear and quietly radiant. That silence is not emptiness, it is fullness. It is the invisible substance from which every answer arises, the presence that existed before thought and remains after thought dissolves. When we rest in that inner quiet, something begins to heal, not through effort, but through alignment. The very vibration of silence is wholeness itself. You see, every problem exists only in the realm of mental noise, in the churning of thoughts that say, I must fix this, I must understand, I must control. But when you enter the silence, those thoughts fade, and with them, the sense of a separate I. In their absence, the infinite rushes in, not to solve but to reveal. The revelation is this: there never was a problem in the presence of truth. When Goldsmith spoke of healing, he did not mean the correction of appearances, but the dissolving of illusion. An illusion dissolves in silence. It cannot survive the clarity of awareness. The moment you are still, truly still, and your consciousness rests in the awareness of the presence, the false sense of disorder evaporates. The body responds. Relationships align, circumstances shift. Not because you have changed them, but because you are no longer viewing them through the lens of separation. Silence is the meeting point between the visible and the invisible, between thought and awareness, between the human and the divine. When we touch that stillness, the mind stops searching. The heart stops longing. The soul recognizes itself. Not entering silence is not about withdrawing from the world. It is not passive or isolated. It is an inward listening, an inner attunement that can happen anywhere, in the noise of the city, in the rhythm of your breath, in the pause between words. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of resistance. When you stop resisting what is, when you cease to fight, to control, to defend, you open a space within where grace can flow. That space is silence. It's not something you create, it's something you uncover. It's been there all along, beneath the constant commentary of thought. Try it for a moment. Close your eyes, not to shut out the world, but to turn toward what is already present within you. Let the thoughts drift by. Don't chase them, don't judge them. Just notice the stillness between them. That stillness, that living awareness that remains when everything else fades, is the presence itself. That's where healing happens. That's where truth speaks without words. In that space, you begin to see that silence is not lifeless. It is alive with intelligence. It guides without command, comforts without words, and heals without effort. The mystic learns to trust that silence, to let it do the work that the mind cannot. Because the mind can rearrange appearances, but only silence can reveal reality. The deeper you enter that silence, the less you need to do. Life begins to move through you with an effortless rhythm. Intuition replaces reasoning. Peace replaces striving. And you discover that grace is not something you earn, it's something you allow. And yet, this allowing requires courage. It takes courage to stop speaking, to stop reaching, to stop trying to make things happen. The ego fears silence because silence is its undoing. The moment you are still, the false sense of me begins to dissolve, and what remains is pure awareness, vast, boundless whole. In that awareness, you understand why Goldsmith said, all the things you have been seeking, peace, abundance, love, security, were never absent. They were only hidden by noise. When you stop the noise, the hidden becomes visible. The silence that heals is not a method, it's a realization. You realize that the presence you've been praying to is the very awareness that's listening now. You realize that God is not waiting to answer. God is the silence from which all true answers emerge. And in that realization, the distinction between prayer, meditation, and life disappears. There is only one seamless consciousness, still alert and alive. You could be washing dishes, driving a car, speaking to a friend, and yet inwardly, you are resting in that deep well of quiet presence. That is the ultimate prayer, not words spoken, but being itself awakened. This silence is not something you visit occasionally, it becomes your home. You move through the world anchored in it, and everything you touch begins to reflect its peace. You speak fewer words, but your words carry power. You act less from reaction and more from clarity. You become a channel through which the infinite expresses effortlessly. In this silence, you finally understand what it means to be still and know. It is not a command, it's an invitation. Be still, not to achieve something, but to recognize what has never changed. Be still, not to get answers, but to realize you are the answer. Be still, not to find peace, but to awaken to the peace that was never lost. And this living silence, is the one prayer that dissolves every problem. Because in the silence, there are no problems, only presence. So if there's one thing you take from this, let it be this: learn to trust the silence. Don't rush to fill it, don't fear it. Let it teach you, let it hold you, let it transform you. In that sacred quiet, you will come to know the truth that ends all searching. The truth that you and the presence are not two. And when that realization dawns, even for a moment, it is enough to heal a lifetime of struggle. For the silence that heals is not something you enter. It is what you are when everything false has fallen away. And so, my friends, after all the searching, all the words, all the prayers, we come here, to the stillness, to that sacred hush where there is nothing left to ask, nothing left to prove, and nothing left to fix. The journey we thought we were on has turned out not to be a journey at all. It was an awakening, a slow remembering of something ancient, something eternal, something that was never lost. All along, the presence was here, closer than our breath, nearer than our heartbeat, quieter than thought. It waited patiently while we prayed for what we already were, while we searched for what we had never lost. And now, in this moment, if you can simply be still, you'll feel it. You'll feel that life is not happening to you. It is unfolding as you. You'll sense that love is not something you receive or give. It's the very substance of your being. You'll realize that peace was never hidden. It was only buried beneath the noise of becoming. This is the heart of the one prayer that dissolves every problem. Not the prayer of words, but the prayer of awareness. The silent knowing that says, I and the presence are one. I and my Father are one. I and life itself are one. When that knowing dawns, the struggle ends. The mind grows quiet. The heart opens. The world, that once seemed filled with problems, becomes transparent, radiant, whole. So tonight, let us not leave this truth behind. Let it travel with you. When you wake tomorrow, don't begin your day with noise. Begin it with stillness. Feel that presence before thought returns. Let your first breath be a prayer without words. And when life grows heavy, when the world seems loud, remember you don't need to fight the noise. You only need to return to what never left. One moment of silence, truly entered, is enough to restore the harmony of the universe within you. Because the divine secret is this: you were never separate. You were never broken. You were never without help. You were simply dreaming of yourself as less than what you are. And in this very moment, you are waking up. So walk now in that quiet strength. Let your life become a living prayer, not of asking, but of knowing. Let your silence speak louder than your words. Let your peace do the teaching. And as you go forth, may this awareness walk beside you, not as an idea, but as the living presence that is your life. Be still, be aware, be what you already are. And in that stillness, know the prayer has been answered, because the answer is you.